Did you know that one of the top reasons why negotiations fail is lack of adequate planning? Now, you may be thinking, wait a minute, we're project managers. We know about planning. The thing is, we don't always know about planning. And here are a couple of things that influence that. One, sometimes it feels like we're spending a lot of time focusing on competing rather than collaborating. It's almost as if we feel like we need to win, per se. And in order to do that, they need to lose. But that's a zero-sum mentality, and that doesn't help anybody. Another reason is because sometimes we don't even realize that we're going into a negotiation. Ouch. After all, how can you plan for something that you don't think is happening? And that becomes really tough. Another reason, well, cognitive shortcuts. Look, cognitive shortcuts, they're not quite the same as cognitive biases. Now, cognitive shortcuts are the things that we want to have happen. A good example is walking and talking at the same time. Do you really want to spend all your time invested in telling your brain and the rest of your body exactly what to do next, when all you really want to do is answer the question that you've just been asked about whether you want to go for Italian or Thai for lunch? Not so much. However, a cognitive bias, now some people call it a cognitive shortcut because a cognitive bias does allow a decision to become to really, really fast. The problem is a cognitive bias, for example, you've had bad experiences with negotiating partners who are significantly larger than you are physically. Well, that's a bias. It's not a shortcut, because the next person that you negotiate with who might happen to be physically significantly bigger than you are might not be a jerk at all. Might, in fact, be one of the most productive negotiating partners you've ever had. Okay, now, the other thing is, if you stop and think about it, there's also a tip that we need to be aware of. When people say, oh, in that case, you should always be on your home ground, and they talk about, well, analyzing the negotiation space. That physical location, well, that's not the only thing that you want to analyze. Do a quick stakeholder analysis on the personal landscape of where you're negotiating. A couple of questions that you should ask yourself. How does this affect everybody else on the team? Does my team even know I'm negotiating this? And do they have any input? Do they have any insight? I'll give you an example. One of my greatest mentors let me sit in on a negotiation. Now, you got to understand, sometimes that's just not a good idea, because even the presence of somebody else in the room can do a few funky things to the dynamics. But what was more important was what happened before he got into the room. He was walking down the hall. He'd see somebody on the team and he'd kind of get their opinion, get their idea, do a temperature taking to see how much in support of the things he was going to go in with his negotiating positions and interests. Well, how much support did that team member have for it? And then he would ask for input. Is there anything that you know that you're pretty sure I know, but you can't actually remember telling me? And I watched him do this over and over again. And then he and I sat down and tried to figure out what the answers to those very same questions might be for our negotiating partner who was going to be across the table. So analyzing the space doesn't always mean trying to strong-arm them to come to your campus or you to go to theirs, or deciding you're going to meet in a neutral, third-party location. This, by the way, is also part of that preparation that we talk about. The preparation that says, okay, this is what I know. Oh, wow, this is kind of what I don't know. Maybe I need to go find out. This is why I think they're sitting across the table from me. I think. Sort of. Are you sure? Now let's face it. We can all do a better job in getting, more information about what's going on with our negotiating partners. But I encourage you to remember, when you're in a negotiation and you don't recognize it as such, you've lost that negotiation right there. And I'm going to be totally transparent with you and share an example from my own life. I have friends who will tell you that I don't have a lead foot. I have a lead leg. And it's true that I, on occasion, exceed the speed limit by more than most people consider to be reasonable. Well, one day, somebody from local law enforcement caught me at it. He was not amused. I never lie to policemen. It's a rule of mine. So when he said, "Where do you think you're going?" I said, "I'm in a hurry to get home to my family. We've just had a death in the family, and I've been away on a business trip. I feel kind of lonely for them." And he looked at me. He said, "Honey, it's not going to help if you don't arrive." Gave me the ticket. I pledged to go to court. Now, when I went to court, there was somebody there from the DA's office, and they were processing us in advance of getting up to, the judge who was going to make the final ruling. And when I sat down, that DA representative, who was an attorney, is an attorney, I'm sure she still is an attorney, had already filled in the amount of time that I was to be considered court supervised as a driver, which essentially means the amount of time, if you go that amount of time without a ticket, any citation of any kind, it would not show up on your permanent record as a driving ding. And that is really good news for those of you, like me, who pay attention to our insurance policies. I got up in front of the judge. He read through everything and he said, "Okay, you've agreed to 6 months of court supervised driving." He said, "Now, the length of the term could be anywhere from 1 day to 24 months. And I looked up at him and I said, "Are you telling me that that's negotiable?" And he said, "Not anymore, it isn't. It was when you were sitting over there." And I thought to myself, oh my Lord, I've fallen into one of the most common traps, not realizing that you are in a negotiation. Because what the attorney did was a perfectly legitimate negotiation tactic. They have an informal policy at that DA's office. So many miles and below above the speed limit, you are automatically offered this amount of time. So many miles and above the speed limit, you are automatically suggested for this time. Remember, if you don't ask, the answer is always going to be no. But if you don't realize you might be in a negotiation at the time, you might not even remember to ask. So the negotiation space and preparing thoroughly to negotiate is an extremely important connected two steps to being a better negotiator. Now, last but not least, I want to talk to you about something that for a lot of people can feel a little bit uncomfortable. You'll see articles all over the web about, well, my favorite title of one article that I almost didn't read because of its title was 8 Common Negotiating Tricks That Your Competitors Hope You Never Learn About. Well, then the person who wrote that article further promised that this would turn you into a killer negotiator. Well, I have a problem with that phrase. I don't want anybody to be a killer negotiator, according to what I thought of as the definition of a killer negotiator. But it wasn't until I got to the very end of the article that the writer said, look, and I want to quote this exactly. Remember, the difference between a good negotiator and a great negotiator is this. A good negotiator gets you to an agreement, but a great negotiator gets to a win-win agreement. A good negotiator crafts an agreement, maybe even has a best alternative to a negotiated agreement, otherwise referred to as a BATNA. But a killer negotiator? Well, a killer negotiator will have helped their negotiating partner craft an agreement that offers both sides absolutely what they need and enough of what they want so that nobody walks away from the negotiation feeling somehow like they lost, feeling somehow like they could not possibly have won. So what I find is that it helps me to think of good versus great as opposed to good versus killer. Now, there's a perfectly selfish reason why you want to think about this. Back in the day, there was a play called 6 Degrees of Separation. And there's even a great bar game called 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. What it suggests is that almost no one in the world is separated from you by more than 6 degrees. I, for example, am only separated from the Dalai Lama by 4 degrees. Now, this might seem kind of bizarre because honestly, unless we were the only 2 people in the room, I don't think he would even claim to know who I was. But here's how that works. One of my first boyfriends has a best friend who was best friends with the tennis teacher for the now King of Siam, whose religious instructor was the Dalai Lama. But when that play came out, when we first started learning about 6 degrees of separation at a really mass level, it was well before social media. So gosh, how many degrees of separation do you think there are now? If you stop and think about it, I'll bet you could get it down to 4 and below for the large majority of the world. And that also means that it's probably pretty easy for somebody to do homework on you and find out whether you're a good negotiator, a great negotiator, or a bit of a jerk in negotiating. And that's not who you guys are. You're good negotiators, you're on your way to becoming great negotiators, but you're not the jerks. Having any amount of contact with other people also means that you might be working with them again. And so when you lay the foundation, being a great negotiator, for solid mutual crafting of an agreement, that's when you're a great negotiator. Now, we are going to be talking about a lot of other wonderful ideas about how to negotiate, and adding to your toolkit to become a great negotiator at your chapter's 4-hour session of Don't Leave It on the Table. The thing is, it's going to be a whole lot of fun, really educational, and you're going to get some low-stake time to practice, and that's important because practice is part of thorough planning. It's going to be a great session, but it'd be even better if you were to come. The link for registering is right under this video, and we'd love to see you there.